In the year 802, a Khmer prince who had spent years in Javanese captivity climbed a forested plateau in what is now northwestern Cambodia, and there, before a Brahmin priest named Hiranyadama, declared himself universal monarch. That single act of consecration on Mount Mahendra Parvata launched a dynasty that would build the largest pre-industrial city on Earth, engineer a hydraulic network capable of feeding more than 1 million people, and raise a sandstone temple so perfectly aligned to the cosmos that it still catches the spring equinox sunrise along its central axis. This is the complete story of the Khmer Empire. It begins not with that mountaintop ceremony, but centuries earlier, in the monsoon-fed lowlands where the Mekong meets the Tonle Sap, where Austroasiatic rice farmers first learned to bend water to their will. It follows the rise of Funan, the fragmentation of Chenla, and the visionary kings who forged an empire from chaos. It traces the golden age of Angkor Wat under Jayavarman II, the Buddhist revolution of Jayavarman VII, and the slow unraveling brought by drought, overbuilding, and the relentless pressure of Thai kingdoms. It walks through the lives of priests and farmers, artisans and slaves, merchants and warriors. And it does not end with the fall of Angkor in 1431. It follows the Khmer people through 4 centuries of struggle, through colonial preservation, genocide, and rebirth, to the moment a temple appears on a modern nation's flag. Today, Angkor Wat is not a ruin. It is a living symbol carried by 14 million Cambodians, a reminder that the greatest hydraulic civilization the world has ever known still shapes borders, faith, and identity across Southeast Asia. If you find meaning in following the full arc of civilizations from their earliest roots to their modern echoes, consider subscribing. Each journey here tells the complete story. Now let us begin where all Khmer history begins, with the water and the land. The water comes first, before the temples, before the kings, before the gods receive their names in Sanskrit. There is the water. The Mekong descends from the Tibetan plateau through 4,800 kilometers of gorge and floodplain, gathering the snowmelt of the Himalayas and the monsoon rains of Yunnan, Laos, and the Korat Plateau, until it reaches the vast lowland basin of mainland Southeast Asia and begins to slow. Here, in the wet months between June and October, something extraordinary happens. The river swells with such force that it reverses the flow of its tributary, the Tonle Sap, pushing water backward into a shallow depression at the heart of what is now Cambodia. The lake expands from roughly 2,600 square kilometers to more than 16,000 dao, a 6-fold increase that transforms forest into fishery, dry land into a shimmering inland sea. When the monsoon retreats, the water drains back towards the Mekong, depositing a layer of rich alluvial silt across the exposed lakebed. This annual pulse of flood and recession creates one of the most productive ecosystems on Earth, a natural engine of protein and grain that has sustained dense human settlement for millennia. Austroasiatic-speaking peoples inhabit these lowlands long before written records begin. They cultivate rice in rain-fed paddies, fish the Tonle Sap's retreat-in waters with basket traps and nets, and build their homes on wooden stilts above the floodline. Archaeological evidence from sites across the Mekong Delta and the Tonle Sap Basin reveals communities smelting iron, weaving textiles, and producing distinctive pottery by the last centuries before the Common Era. These are not isolated villages. River networks serve as highways, connecting upland forest communities rich in resins, hardwoods, and precious metals to coastal settlements facing the South China Sea. It is along this coast, at the nexus of maritime trade routes linking the Indian Ocean to the ports of southern China, that the polity known to Chinese chroniclers as Funan emerges in the 1st and 2nd centuries of the Common Era. Its capital lies near modern Ba Phnom, inland from the coast, but connected to it by an engineered canal system stretching more than 200 kilometers. The port city of Ok Eo, excavated in the 1940s, reveals the astonishing reach of Funanese commerce. Roman medallions bearing the likeness of Antoninus Pius, Persian carnelian beads, Indian tin amulets, and Chinese bronze mirrors all surface from the same archaeological layers, evidence of a trading hub where goods from across the ancient world converge. Chinese embassy accounts from the 3rd century describe Funan as a kingdom of walled cities, where the people pay taxes in gold, silver, and pearls, and where the ruler dwells in a multi-storied palace. Indian merchants and Brahmin advisors bring with them Sanskrit literacy, Hindu and Buddhist cosmologies, and the concept of the Chakravartin, the universal sovereign whose authority mirrors the cosmic order. Local rulers adopt these frameworks not through conquest, but through selective incorporation, blending Indic ritual with indigenous ancestor worship and spirit cults. Brick shrines appear along riverbanks and hilltops, their lintels carved with early depictions of Vishnu, Shiva, and the Buddha. Inscriptions in Sanskrit and in an early form of Khmer record land grants, temple dedications, and the genealogies of ruling families who trace their legitimacy to both Indian mythic origins and local lineage. By the 5th century, Funan controls a network of ports, canals, and rice-producing hinterlands stretching from the Mekong Delta to the Gulf of Thailand. Its ships carry spices, forest products, and gold dust westward to India and eastward to China. Yet Funan is not a centralized empire in any modern sense. It functions as a mandala, a radiating field of influence centered on a sacred capital, with loyalty diminishing at the periphery. Vassal chiefs maintain their own courts, their own temples, their own claims to divine favor. The system holds as long as the center projects strength. When it does not, the periphery fractures. And by the 6th century, pressure builds from the forested interior, where new powers are rising along the upper Mekong tributaries, speaking the same Khmer tongue, but answering to different lords. The world that Funan built, its canals, its trade routes, its borrowed cosmologies, will not vanish. It will be absorbed, transformed, and carried inland toward the Great Lake and the plain where stone will one day rise above the canopy. They come from the north, from the forested hills where the Stung Sen and its tributaries carve through red laterite earth. They are Khmer-speaking lords of the interior, and by the middle of the 6th century, they have grown powerful enough to challenge the old coastal order. The man who leads this transformation is Jayavarman I, a prince connected by marriage to both Chenla's inland aristocracy and Funan's fading royal line. Around 550 of the Common Era, his armies push south and east, absorbing Funanese territories not through annihilation, but through a slow assertion of supremacy, capturing vassal networks, redirecting tribute, claiming the sacred authority that Funan's weakened center can no longer project. His brother Chitrasena, who takes the throne name Mahendravarman, continues the campaign. Within a generation, the political gravity of mainland Southeast Asia shifts decisively inland. The new power does not reject what Funan created. It inherits the Sanskrit inscriptions, the Shaiva and Vaishnava temple traditions, the Brahmanical rituals of royal consecration. But it relocates the center of the world. No longer do the great ports of the Mekong Delta define sovereignty. Now the heartland lies in the upper reaches of the river system, in the forested plains north of the Tonle Sap, where rain-fed rice agriculture sustains dense populations without dependence on maritime commerce. It is Yayavarman I, reigning from roughly 616 to 635, who gives this inland kingdom its monumental expression. His capital, Isanapura, rises near the modern site of Sambo Pre Kuk in Kompong Tom province. Here, within concentric brick enclosures set among tropical forest, octagonal and square towers stand in ordered clusters. Their walls carry carved medallions depicting palaces, animals, and celestial figures. Flying pavilions rendered in brick relief float above doorways. Lintels show Indra mounted on the three-headed elephant Airavata, framed by Makaras disgorging garlands. These are not crude provincial shrines. They represent a sophisticated architectural tradition, the earliest major temple city in the Khmer cultural world, predating Angkor by nearly 3 centuries. Chinese sources from the Tang dynasty describe Isanapura as a prosperous kingdom. Envoys note walled cities, organized administration, and a king who rides an elephant in procession. The inscriptions that survive on door jambs and stele record land grants to temples, donations of cattle and slaves, and the genealogies of officials eager to anchor their authority in divine sanction. The state functions through a network of regional lords bound to the center by ritual obligation and kinship, the mandala system inherited from Funan, but now oriented around an inland sacred geography. Yet the mandala's weakness persists. When Jayavarman I dies around 681, leaving no clear male heir, the center cannot hold. His daughter Jayadevi attempts to govern, but the kingdom fractures. By the early 8th century, Chinese chronicles distinguish between land Chenla in the north and west and water Chenla in the south and east, a division reflecting not a clean partition, but a chaotic multiplication of competing courts. Local lords assert independence. Rival lineages claim divine right. The coherent state that Yayavarman built dissolves into a constellation of petty kingdoms, each with its own temples, its own Brahmins, its own claims to universal sovereignty that extend no further than the next river valley. Into this vacuum come external predators. Javanese maritime raiders from the Shailendra dynasty strike water Chenla's coastal territories in the 8th century. One account describes a Javanese king carrying away a Khmer ruler's head. The humiliation is total. The southern principalities, exposed to the sea and lacking a unified military command, cannot resist. And yet within this chaos, something essential survives. The temple traditions continue. Brick shrines rise in provincial centers. Inscriptions record the persistence of Sanskrit learning, of Shaiva ritual, of the belief that a righteous king can reunify the shattered world. The Dangrek Range's sandstone ridges still shelter communities of priests and scholars. The rice paddies still flood with the monsoon. The infrastructure of civilization, irrigation, writing, religion, hierarchy, remains intact, waiting not for invention but for consolidation. Somewhere in this fragmented landscape, a young prince grows up in a Javanese court, absorbing lessons about centralized power. He will return. He returns across the sea. The young prince who departed the fractured world of water Chenla for the courts of Java now crosses back, carrying with him a vision of sovereignty that no Khmer ruler has yet possessed. The date of his arrival is unrecorded, but by the late 8th century, Jayavarman II moves through the lowlands of the Mekong basin not as a refugee, but as a conqueror. He lands in the southeast, in the region around Indrapura, near the modern province of Kompong Cham, and begins the slow, methodical work of binding rival chiefs to his authority. The landscape he enters is one of competing mandalas, overlapping circles of influence radiating outward from local strongmen, each claiming divine sanction, each controlling a stretch of river or a cluster of rice-producing villages. Jayavarman does not attempt to destroy them all at once. He absorbs them. Through marriage alliances, military pressure, and the strategic placement of loyal governors, he stitches together a patchwork of formerly independent polities into something approaching a unified state. His court moves frequently. From Indrapura he shifts northward, establishing authority at successive capitals, each move consolidating control over new territory and new populations. The Kulin Plateau rises from the Cambodian plain like a natural fortress. Its sandstone cliffs reach 300 meters above the surrounding lowlands, and its surface is laced with streams that feed the Siem Reap River below. Sacred lingers carved directly into the riverbeds transform the water itself into a consecrated substance. Every drop that flows downstream carries the blessing of Shiva. It is here, on this elevated tableland, the texts call Mahendra Parvata, that Jayavarman stages the most consequential ritual in Southeast Asian history. In the year 802 of the Common Era, the Brahmin priest Hiranyadama performs the ceremony. Drawing on traditions rooted in Shaiva Tantrism, he consecrates Jayavarman as Chakravartin, universal monarch, and establishes the cult of the Devaraja, the god-king. A sacred linga is installed, binding the spiritual essence of Shiva to the person of the sovereign. The king is no longer merely a powerful chief among chiefs. He is the earthly axis of the cosmos, the human counterpart of the divine mountain. No overlord exists above him. The inscription that records this event, composed generations later but preserving the memory of the founding moment, states explicitly that the land of the Khmers shall owe allegiance to no foreign power. The declaration severs any lingering claim of Javanese suzerainty. Jayavarman does not remain on the plateau. The Kulin's elevation makes it strategically defensible but poorly suited for sustaining a large population. He descends to the plains northwest of the Tonle Sap, to the region known as Hariharalaya, near the modern town of Roluos. Here the land is flat, the soil rich, and the water abundant. He establishes his final capital on this ground, and the first permanent infrastructure of the Khmer Empire begins to take shape. Brick temples, earthen embankments, reservoirs fed by diverted streams. The early temples of Hariharalaya are modest by later standards. Brick towers with carved sandstone lintels rise above the tree line, their interiors housing stone lingers anointed with lustral water. The architectural vocabulary is still evolving, borrowing from Chenla precedents and Javanese models alike. But the political grammar is already fixed. Each king will build a state temple representing Mount Meru. Each king will construct a reservoir to demonstrate mastery over water. Each king will honor his ancestors with dedicated shrines. This triple program, Temple Mountain, Barai, Ancestor Shrine, becomes the constitutional formula of Angkorian kingship. Jayavarman II dies around 835. His son, Jayavarman III, inherits a consolidated realm stretching across much of modern Cambodia. The new king is a hunter rather than a builder, remembered in inscriptions for his love of elephants, but the structures his father created hold firm. The Devaraja cult continues. The priesthood that maintains the sacred linga passes its knowledge through a designated lineage. The capital at Hariharalaya endures. Provincial governors remain loyal. The empire does not fragment. On the Roluos plain, the first outlines of a civilization are visible. Rectangular embankments contain the monsoon waters. Brick towers catch the morning light. Roads of packed earth connect temple precincts to farming villages. The jungle presses close, but it is being pushed back, field by field, canal by canal. The foundation has been laid in ritual, in stone, and in water. What follows will be construction on a scale the ancient world has rarely seen. Indravarman I ascends to the throne in 877. He is not the son of Jayavarman III, but claims legitimacy through marriage into the royal line and through something more potent than blood, a declaration of intent carved into stone. His inscription at Preah Ko announces a program of breathtaking clarity. First, he will create a reservoir to sustain the people. Then he will build a temple to honor his ancestors. Finally, he will raise a temple mountain to house the royal linga, the sacred axis connecting king to cosmos. No previous Khmer ruler has articulated a building program with such systematic precision. It becomes the template that every great Angkorian king will follow for the next 3 centuries. The reservoir comes first. The Indratataka Barai takes shape on the Roluos plain, a vast rectangular basin measuring roughly 3,800 meters by 800 meters, its earthen dikes rising above the flat rice country. Thousands of laborers, organized through corvée obligations, move red laterite soil by the basket load. When the monsoon arrives, water fills the basin and holds. Through the dry months, controlled release channels feed the paddies downstream. It is not merely irrigation. It is a statement of cosmic order. The king commands the waters as Indra commands the rain. Preah Ko rises in 880, 6 brick towers arranged on a single sandstone platform. Each tower is dedicated to an ancestor, parents and grandparents of the king, paired with their divine counterparts. The brick surfaces carry stucco ornamentation of extraordinary delicacy, scrolling foliage, guardian figures, and devatas whose features still hold traces of the lime plaster that once made them gleam white against the red-orange brick. Sacred bulls, the Nandi of Shiva, kneel before the central towers, giving the temple its modern name, the Sacred Bull. Then comes Bakong, consecrated in 881. It is the first true temple mountain built entirely of sandstone, a 5-tiered pyramid rising 15 meters above the plain. Its base measures 67 meters on each side. Stone elephants stand at the corners of the lower tiers. The summit once supported a central tower, now replaced by a later structure. But the original conception is unmistakable. This is Mount Meru rendered in dressed stone, the cosmic mountain at the center of the universe, with the royal linga enshrined at its peak. Around the pyramid, 8 subsidiary brick towers and a broad moat complete the mandala. Indravarman has given the Khmer world its architectural grammar. He dies around 889, and his son Yasovarman I inherits both the throne and the ambition. But Yasovarman does not merely continue. He relocates. 15 kilometers northwest of Hariharalaya, he founds an entirely new capital, Yasodharapura, centered on the natural hill of Phnom Bakheng. Atop this hill he raises a temple mountain of 109 towers, its design encoding astronomical cycles, its summit commanding views across the forested plain in every direction. The city that spreads below will become the nucleus of Angkor. The scale of Yasovarman's hydraulic ambition dwarfs his father's. The East Baray, completed in the last years of the 9th century, measures 7.5 kilometers long by 1.5 kilometers wide. It holds more than 50 million cubic meters of water. At its center, on a small artificial island, he builds Lole, a temple dedicated to his parents, its brick towers rising from the reservoir's surface when the water is high. The Baray transforms the agricultural capacity of the entire region, enabling 2 and sometimes 3 rice harvests per year, where previously there was one. Yasovarman also establishes a network of ashrams, monastic retreats for Shaiva, Vaishnava, and Buddhist communities across the empire, from the capital to the distant provinces. Inscriptions record their endowments in meticulous detail: quantities of rice, numbers of attendants, weights of ritual supplies. The empire is becoming an administrative reality, not merely a military one. Roads connect provincial centers. Rest houses shelter travelers. The king's authority radiates outward along these routes, like water through canals. By the time Yasovarman dies around 900, the pattern is fixed. Every legitimate king must tame water, honor ancestors, and raise a mountain of stone. The Roluo's plain holds the prototypes. Yasodharapura holds the future. Between them, 2 generations have transformed a consecrated kingdom into a civilization with a formula for permanence: reservoir, ancestor temple, state temple, repeated and refined across the centuries that follow, each iteration larger, each ambition greater, each mountain of stone reaching closer to the sky. The formula holds, but the dynasty does not. Within 3 decades of Yasovarman's death, the throne passes through uncertain hands, and around 928, a powerful provincial governor named Jayavarman IV seizes royal authority and does something no Khmer king has done before. He abandons Angkor entirely. He moves the capital northeast, 80 kilometers into the remote forests beyond the Dangrek foothills, to a place called Khmer. The site rises from flat, dry woodland, a landscape utterly unlike the lake-fed plains of Angkor. Yet here, in barely 2 decades, Jayavarman IV constructs a monumental city. At its center stands Prasat Tom, a 7-tiered sandstone pyramid climbing 36 meters above the forest floor. Its sheer mass dwarfs anything built at Hariharalaya. Enormous Garuda figures, carved nearly 3 meters tall, flank its base. A colossal linga once crowned its summit, channeling divine energy downward through the stone mountain into the earth below. Around the pyramid, more than 40 temples spread across the landscape, their lintels carved with scenes of extraordinary violence and beauty, wrestling figures, rearing nagas, Shiva in cosmic dance. Khmer is a statement of defiance. Jayavarman IV, who likely married into the royal line but lacked direct succession rights, builds his legitimacy in stone rather than blood. He constructs his own beret, his own ancestor shrines, his own state temple, replicating the Angkorian formula in alien terrain. For roughly 2 decades, Khmer functions as the empire's beating heart. Then, in 944, power shifts again. Rajendravarman II, a prince with strong maternal ties to the old Angkorian dynasty, reclaims the throne and returns the capital to Yasodharapura. The forest closes around Khmer. Its temples stand abandoned, their Garudas staring into empty woodland. Rajendravarman rebuilds Angkor with purpose. On an artificial island in the East Barai, he raises the East Mebon, a temple mountain of laterite and sandstone surrounded by water, its corners guarded by life-sized stone elephants. South of the Barai, he constructs Prerup, a 5-towered pyramid of brick and laterite whose warm red surfaces catch the last light of day like embers. These are not mere restorations. They are assertions that Angkor remains the sacred center, the axis of the Khmer world. Rajendravarman also wages war. He campaigns against Champa to the east, sacking its capital in 945. He extends influence westward. His court produces scholars and poets. The inscription of his minister Kavindrarimathana at the temple of Bat Chum records one of the earliest known Khmer literary compositions. Culture and conquest advance together. His son Jayavarman V inherits a stable realm, but dies without clear succession around 1001. What follows is civil war, a decade of factional violence that tears the empire's political fabric. From the contested wreckage emerges Suryavarman I, a prince whose origins remain debated. Some inscriptions suggest connections to the royal house of Tambralinga on the Malay Peninsula. He fights his way to the throne over 8 years of sustained conflict, finally securing undisputed control by 1010. His victory is sealed not only by military force, but by an extraordinary act of political engineering. An inscription records an oath of allegiance sworn by approximately 4,000 officials, binding them to the king under threat of divine punishment. The language is precise and brutal. Those who betray the oath will be reborn in the lowest hells for the duration of every future age. It is the earliest known mass loyalty oath in Southeast Asian history, a document that reveals both the scale of Suryavarman's administration and the fragility he perceived within it. With internal order secured, Suryavarman I expands the empire to its greatest territorial extent yet. Khmer authority reaches westward to Lopburi in the Chao Phraya Basin, northward across the Korat Plateau into what is now northeastern Thailand and Laos. Provincial temples and roads extend the network of royal control. The empire becomes a continental power, its influence radiating across mainland Southeast Asia. At Angkor, Suryavarman encloses the royal palace compound within walls that define the ceremonial heart of the capital for centuries to come. He begins construction of the Western Barai, a reservoir so vast, 8 kilometers long and over 2 kilometers wide, that it remains partially water-filled 1,000 years later. The hydraulic ambition has scaled beyond anything Indravarman or Yasovarman imagined. The 10th century, for all its upheaval, proves that the Angkorian system possesses a resilience deeper than any single dynasty. Capitals can move and return. Usurpers can build rival cities in the forest. Civil wars can consume a decade. Yet the formula endures: water, stone, and the mountain that connects earth to heaven. Jayavarman I dies around 1018, and the throne passes through brief contested reigns before a new builder king emerges. Udayadityavarman II, ascending around 1050, inherits an empire at the height of its territorial reach and immediately turns that power toward stone. At the center of Angkor, he raises the Bavuon, a temple mountain of staggering proportions, its bronze-sheathed summit glinting above the tree line, its base covering an area rivaling any structure yet built on the plain. The Bavuon's 3 tiers of sandstone galleries climb toward a central tower representing Mount Meru, the entire mass supported by an internal framework of sand and laterite that will prove, centuries later, both its engineering marvel and its structural weakness. Udayadityavarman also completes the western Mebon, a temple set on an artificial island at the center of the vast western Barai, accessible only by boat, a bronze Vishnu reclining on the cosmic ocean, fragments of which survive into the modern era. Yet Udayadityavarman's reign is troubled. Rebellions erupt in the provinces. Military commanders challenge royal authority. The king suppresses these revolts through his general sangrama, but the pattern reveals the centrifugal pressures inherent in a mandala, state stretched across hundreds of kilometers of forest and rice land. When Udayadityavarman dies around 1066, his brother Harshavarman III takes the throne, only to face continued instability until his own death around 1107. From this turbulence, Jayavarman II seizes power. His origins remain debated. He claims descent from both the solar and lunar royal lines, legitimizing his rule through genealogy and force alike. By 1113, he holds undisputed control of the empire, and he begins to build. The site chosen lies south of the existing capital enclosure, on open ground where the water table runs close to the surface. A moat is excavated first, 190 meters wide, forming a rectangle of nearly 1.5 kilometers by 1.3 kilometers, enclosing 162.6 hectares. The earth removed creates the platform on which the temple will rise. Sandstone blocks are quarried from Phnom Kulen, 50 kilometers to the northeast, floated down the Siem Reap River on barges, and dressed on site by thousands of laborers working under corvée obligation. The construction consumes roughly 30 years and an estimated 5 to 10 million sandstone blocks. Angkor Wat rises in 3 concentric galleries, each higher than the last, culminating in 5 lotus bud towers arranged in a quincunx, the central tower soaring 65 meters above the surrounding plain. Unlike every major state temple before it, Angkor Wat faces west. Scholars debate whether this westward orientation signals a funerary function, aligning the temple with the setting sun and the realm of the dead, or reflects its dedication to Vishnu, whose cardinal direction in Hindu cosmology is the west. The spring equinox sunrise aligns precisely with the central tower when viewed from the western causeway, suggesting deliberate astronomical calibration. Along the outer gallery, 800 meters of continuous bas relief unfold the mythology and history of the empire. The southern gallery depicts Jayavarman II seated on his throne, commanding armies that include war elephants, cavalry, and infantry drawn from Khmer and allied Siamese contingents. Another panel renders the churning of the ocean of milk, 92 Asuras and 88 Devas pulling the serpent Vasuki around Mount Mandara, Vishnu orchestrating creation itself. At its territorial peak, The empire stretches from the coast of the South China Sea to the borders of pagan in modern Burma, from the Korat Plateau deep into the Malay Peninsula. Jayavarman II projects this power militarily, launching invasions against Dai Viet in 1128 and again around 1150. Both campaigns fail. Vietnamese resistance holds firm, and the Khmer armies withdraw, their ambitions checked on the eastern frontier. Jayavarman II dies around 1150, and the succession fractures. The temple he built, dedicated to Vishnu, aligned to the cosmos, carved with the story of creation, stands complete. It is the largest religious monument on earth. Its towers catch the first light of dawn, sandstone warming from grey to gold, and the moat mirrors them in perfect symmetry. No king before or after will match this single act of architectural will. But the temple does not stand alone. It rises from a system, a network of engineered water so vast, so precisely calibrated, that it constitutes the true foundation of Khmer power. To understand Angkor is to understand not stone, but water, not monuments, but the invisible infrastructure beneath them, stretching across more than 1,000 square kilometers of managed landscape. From above, the pattern reveals itself. The Siem Reap River descends from the Kulin Hills and enters the Angkor Plain, where it no longer follows its natural course. Khmer engineers redirected it centuries ago, channeling its flow through a grid of canals that distribute water east and west across the urban sprawl. The river becomes an instrument, its energy captured, divided and stored in enormous rectangular reservoirs, the barays, that anchor the entire system. The East Baray, completed under Yasovarman I around 889, measures 7.5 kilometers long by 1.8 kilometers wide. The West Baray, constructed in the 11th century, surpasses it, 8 kilometers by 2.1 kilometers, holding more than 50 million cubic meters of water. These are not natural lakes. They are earthen-walled basins, their embankments rising several meters above the surrounding plain, filled by monsoon runoff, channeled through intake canals, and regulated by sluice gates carved from laterite blocks. During the dry season, when the monsoon retreats and the land bakes under relentless sun, these reservoirs release water through outlet channels into a network of smaller canals, feeding rice paddies that extend to the horizon. The result is extraordinary productivity. Where rain-fed agriculture yields a single annual harvest, Angkor's irrigated fields produce 2 and sometimes 3 crops of rice per year. This surplus feeds not only farmers, but the thousands of laborers, priests, dancers, soldiers, and artisans who populate the temple complexes. Every great monument depends on this abundance. Without the barays, there is no corvée labor force. Without the canals, there are no temple economies sustaining tens of thousands of registered workers. Modern LiDAR surveys, conducted between 2012 and 2015, stripped away the jungle canopy digitally and revealed what centuries of vegetation had concealed. Angkor is not a cluster of temples surrounded by forest. It is a low-density urban landscape covering more than 1,000 square kilometers, the largest pre-industrial city ever documented. The LiDAR data shows a precise grid of residential mounds, each raised above flood level, connected by linear channels and bounded by embankments. Roads radiate outward from the central temple complexes, linking Angkor to provincial centers across the empire. Along these roads, 121 rest houses stand at intervals of roughly 15 kilometers, offering shelter to travelers, officials, and merchants moving goods between the capital and distant provinces. The Tonle Sap, the Great Lake to the south, completes the system. Each monsoon, the Mekong's floodwaters reverse the Tonle Sap River's flow, expanding the lake from roughly 2,500 square kilometers to more than 15,000. Fish breed in staggering abundance in these flooded forests. Dried and fermented fish, prahok, becomes a dietary staple, its protein sustaining the population alongside rice. The lake's annual pulse governs the rhythm of Angkorian life as surely as the temple calendar governs its rituals. Wooden aqueducts carry water across elevation changes. Brick-lined channels distribute it to neighborhoods. Moats surrounding every major temple serve dual purposes: sacred boundaries representing the cosmic ocean and functional reservoirs buffering local water supply. The entire system operates through gravity, slope, and seasonal timing, requiring no mechanical pumps, no metal pipes, only precise grading of the earth across immense distances. This is the engine beneath the stone. Every carved apsara, every towering prasat, every gilded finial catching the equinox light rests upon a civilization that mastered water before it mastered sandstone. The barrays hold the monsoon. The canals distribute its gift. The paddies transform it into rice, and rice transforms into empire. And within that empire of rice and water, 1,000,000 lives unfold. The bas-reliefs of the Bayon and Angkor Wat preserve what no inscription records, the texture of ordinary existence. Carved into sandstone galleries stretching hundreds of meters, these scenes depict not only gods and kings, but fishermen hauling nets from the Tonle Sap, women selling fruit in open-air markets, men crouching over games of chance, while roosters circle in fighting pits nearby. A woman gives birth, attended by others. A man roasts meat on skewers over a brazier. Two figures argue over what appears to be a scale. These are not decorative flourishes. They are the empire's memory of itself. The social order radiates outward from the king. At the apex stand the Brahmins, the priestly families who maintain the sacred fires, perform royal consecrations, and interpret the astronomical calendars that govern planting, harvest, and ceremony. Below them, a hierarchy of officials administers provinces, collects tribute, and oversees corvée labor. Inscriptions at temples like Preah Khan and Ta Prohm enumerate their human economies with startling precision. Ta Prohm alone lists 12,640 attached workers, including dancers, rice suppliers, and cloth weavers. Temples function as economic institutions, not merely spiritual ones. They hold land, command labor, and redistribute agricultural surplus. Farmers constitute the vast majority. They live in wooden stilt houses raised above the floodplain, their roofs thatched with palm leaves, their floors of split bamboo. No such house survives, but relief carvings and Zhou Daguan's account from 1296 describe them clearly. Families sleep on woven mats. Cooking happens beneath the house or in separate shelters. Rice stores hang in elevated granaries. Livestock, pigs, chickens, water buffalo occupy the ground level. The monsoon calendar dictates everything. Planting begins when the rains arrive in May or June. Harvest follows in November and December. In the irrigated zones fed by the Beret system, a second or even third crop becomes possible, generating the surplus that feeds temple workers, soldiers, and artisans. Fishing rivals rice in importance. The Tonle Sap, swelling to 5 times its dry season size each year, teems with freshwater fish. Bas-reliefs show boats laden with catch, nets stretched between poles, and fish drying on racks. Zhou Daguan notes that fermented fish paste, prahok, is a staple, its pungent smell inseparable from Khmer life. Artisans occupy a distinct social stratum. Ceramic kilns at Tani and other sites produce stoneware jars, roof tiles, and ritual vessels glazed in brown and green. Iron smelting furnaces, identified at multiple locations across the Angkor region, produce tools, weapons, and the chisels that carve sandstone. Weavers, predominantly women, produce cotton and silk textiles, some dyed with ikat patterns that Zhou Daguan describes as finely made. Goldsmiths and silversmiths craft jewelry for the elite. Stone carvers spend years on a single gallery wall, their work governed by master templates, but executed with individual skill, visible in the varying depths and flourishes of each apsara's expression. Commerce flows through markets that Zhou Daguan describes as bustling and predominantly managed by women. Chinese merchants trade silk, lacquerware, and ceramics for Khmer products, cardamom, rhinoceros horn, kingfisher feathers, beeswax. Cham traders bring goods from the coast. No coinage circulates widely. Transactions rely on rice, cloth, silver fragments, and Chinese copper coins. Trade routes extend along the royal roads, where 121 rest houses shelter travelers at regular intervals. At the bottom of the hierarchy stand slaves, individuals bound to temples or aristocratic households through debt, war capture, or birth. Inscriptions record their names, origins, and assigned tasks. They are property, listed alongside cattle and land in temple endowments. Yet even slaves participate in the rhythms of festival life. The annual ceremonies marking the new year, the water festival celebrating the Tonle Sap's reversal, processions where the king appears on his gold palanquin and the populace lines the causeways. This is a world of rigid hierarchy and abundant life, of sacred order imposed on fertile chaos. The stone preserves its outline. The reliefs hold its gestures. The inscriptions count its workers, its rice measures, its bolts of cloth. And through Zhou Daguan's foreign eyes, the empire's final functioning century comes alive, vivid, complex, and already beginning to change. In 1177, the world that stone and water built is shattered in a single afternoon. A Cham fleet, war galleys carrying thousands of warriors from the rival kingdom to the east, sails not overland through the Dangrek passes, but directly up the Tonle Sap, exploiting the Great Lakes monsoon flood to penetrate the empire's heartland by water. The invasion is devastating and unprecedented. Angkor falls. The Cham king Jayavarman IV seizes the capital, kills the reigning Khmer sovereign, and for the first time in nearly 4 centuries, the city of the god-kings belongs to a foreign power. The temples stand, the berets still hold water, but the political order collapses. For 4 years, Angkor remains under Cham occupation, its palaces looted, its rituals suspended, its population scattered into the surrounding countryside. It is the deepest crisis the empire has ever known. And it is from this catastrophe that the empire's last and most extraordinary king emerges. Jayavarman, a prince of royal blood who had spent years in Champa, perhaps as a hostage, perhaps in exile, returns to rally resistance. He gathers forces, fights a naval battle on the Tonle Sap itself, and by 1181 drives the Cham from Angkor. His coronation that year marks not merely a restoration, but a revolution. The new king is a Mahayana Buddhist. His reign will transform the empire's spiritual foundations, its monumental landscape, and the very face of its architecture. The scale of what follows is almost incomprehensible. Jayavarman VII builds more than all his predecessors combined. He constructs Angkor Wat, a new royal city enclosed by a wall stretching 9 kilometers, pierced by 5 monumental gates, each flanked by rows of stone giants pulling a naga serpent, the churning of the ocean of milk rendered as urban infrastructure. At the city's center rises the Bayon, a temple unlike anything before it. 216 colossal stone faces gaze outward from its towers, serene and faintly smiling, their features widely believed to represent the Bodhisattva Avalokiteshvara, the Lord who looks down with compassion. Some scholars see the king's own likeness merged with the divine. Beyond Angkor Wat, the building continues. Taprom, dedicated to the king's mother, houses a monastic community so vast that its foundation inscription records 12,640 people serving the temple, consuming tens of thousands of tons of rice annually. Preah Khan, dedicated to his father, functions as a monastery, university, and administrative center, its hall of dancers adorned with carved apsaras. Bante Chmar, far to the northwest, commemorates a prince and 4 generals who died defending the king, its bas-reliefs depicting the Cham Wars with visceral detail, naval combat, hand-to-hand fighting, the chaos of bodies in water. The ambition extends far beyond temples. 102 hospitals are established across the empire, each called an Arogyasala, a house of healing. Inscriptions prescribe their staffing and medicine supplies. 121 rest houses line the empire's road network, spaced at intervals of roughly 15 kilometers, sheltering travelers and royal messengers along routes stretching from Angkor to distant provinces. Roads are repaired, bridges rebuilt, reservoirs expanded. The infrastructure of compassion is laid in laterite and sandstone. Yet this frenzy of construction demands staggering resources. Quarries on Phnom Kulen work ceaselessly. Corvée labor drafts pull farmers from their fields. The sandstone blocks for the Bayon alone number in the hundreds of thousands, and the carving quality, hurried, sometimes rough compared to Angkor Wat's precision, suggests a workforce pushed to its limits. The empire's greatest act of building is also its most exhausting. Jayavarman VII conquers Champa itself by 1203, briefly absorbing the rival kingdom into the Khmer domain. The empire reaches its maximum territorial extent, from the Malay Peninsula to southern Vietnam, from the Korat Plateau to the coasts. But the king is aging. His inscriptions speak of the suffering of his people as his own suffering, a Buddhist sentiment unprecedented in Khmer royal rhetoric. He dies around 1220, and with him dies the age of monumental construction. No king after him will build in stone on such a scale. The faces of the Bayon continue to smile outward across the forest canopy, serene and unblinking, watching over an empire that has given everything it has. The silence after Jayavarman VII is not the silence of peace, it is the silence of exhaustion. Across the Angkor plain, the stone faces of the Bayon gaze outward with their enigmatic half-smiles, but the workshops that carved them have gone quiet. The laterite quarries on the Kulen Plateau stand abandoned, their cutting marks exposed to monsoon rain. No new temple mountain rises from the forest. No new barai is excavated. The empire that built more in 30 years than most civilizations build in 3 centuries has simply stopped. Indravarman II inherits a domain stretched to its physical and spiritual limits. His reign, beginning around 1220, is poorly documented, a telling absence in a civilization that once covered every doorjamb with Sanskrit verse. What inscriptions survive suggest a king who maintained Jayavarman VII's Buddhist orientation, but lacked the resources or will to continue his predecessor's monumental program. The 102 hospitals still function. The 121 rest houses along the royal roads still shelter travelers. But the system that sustained them, the vast corvée labor network, the temple economies employing tens of thousands, is fraying under its own weight. The reaction, when it comes, is carved into the stone itself. Across hundreds of temples, chisels begin their systematic work. Buddhist images are gouged from walls. Seated Buddhas, sheltered by the Naga Mukhalinda, are hacked away and replaced with lingas, the abstract phallic symbol of Shiva. At the Bayon, Buddhist narrative reliefs are chiseled flat and recarved with Hindu hermits. Inside Ta Prohm, standing Buddha figures are transformed into ascetics or simply obliterated, leaving ghostly outlines on sandstone surfaces. This is not random vandalism. It is state-sponsored iconoclasm on an extraordinary scale, and it reaches its peak under Jayavarman VIII, who seizes the throne around 1243 and rules for more than half a century. Jayavarman VIII is a Shaivite zealot. His campaign to erase his predecessor's Buddhist legacy touches nearly every major monument in the Angkor complex. Thousands of Buddha images are destroyed or modified. Yet the defacement is never total. The great faces of the Bayon survive, perhaps too massive and too integral to the structure to remove. The iconoclasm reveals a court divided, an elite wrestling with the theological direction of an empire that had swung between Shaivism, Vaishnavism, and Mahayana Buddhism across 4 centuries. But even as the court battles over stone images, a quieter revolution unfolds at ground level. Theravada Buddhism, carried by monks trained in the Sri Lankan tradition and transmitted through the Mon kingdoms of Lower Burma, spreads through the Khmer countryside. It requires no massive temples, no armies of sculptors, no royal patronage on a ruinous scale. Its monasteries are built of wood and thatch. Its monks wear saffron robes and carry begging bowls. Its message, that enlightenment is available to all through personal discipline, not through royal intercession with the gods, resonates with a population exhausted by generations of forced labor on monuments they could never enter. Wooden monasteries appear beside stone temples. Saffron-robed monks walk paths once reserved for Brahmin priests. The shift is gradual, undramatic, and irreversible. By the late 13th century, Theravada Buddhism has become the dominant faith of ordinary Khmers, even as the court clings to its Hindu restoration. When the Chinese diplomat Zhou Daguan arrives in 1296, he finds an Angkor that still functions, markets still bustle, the king still processes on his golden palanquin, the berets still hold water. But the age of stone construction is over. The temples stand complete and aging. The quarries are silent. The empire has turned inward, sustaining what exists rather than building anew. Zhou Daguan notes monks in yellow robes, modest wooden temples, a society visibly different from the one that raised Angkor Wat barely a century and a half before. The weight of stone, The sheer accumulated mass of 6 centuries of monument building presses down on an empire that can no longer carry it forward. Beyond the walls of Angkor Thom, the world is shifting. The forests of the western provinces, once secured by Khmer garrisons and governed by appointed lords, are slipping away, not in a single dramatic rupture, but in a slow, irreversible loosening. Thai-speaking peoples have been migrating southward from Yunnan for generations, filtering through mountain passes, settling river valleys, absorbing local populations. By the early 1300s, these migrations have produced something more dangerous than scattered settlements. They have produced kingdoms. Sukhothai, founded in the mid-13th century, has already claimed territories that Khmer governors once administered. The Karat Plateau, that vast, dry tableland stretching northeast of the Dangrek Range, is no longer reliably under Angkorian authority. Provincial temples built in Khmer style stand among populations that increasingly speak Thai languages, follow Theravada Buddhist traditions arriving from the Mon world, and owe allegiance to chiefs who recognize no Cambodian sovereign. The mandala system that once radiated outward from Angkor, binding distant lords through ritual obligation and shared Hindu-Buddhist cosmology, is fraying at every edge. The canals tell the same story. Dendrochronology studies of ancient timber reveal that the 14th century brings prolonged, punishing droughts interspersed with catastrophic monsoon floods, a pattern of climatic instability that strikes at the very foundation of Angkorian power. The berets depend on predictable seasonal rainfall to fill. The canals depend on consistent water flow to carry sediment without silting. When the rains fail, the reservoirs drop. When the rains come in violent excess, earthen embankments erode and channels clog with debris. The hydraulic network that once sustained 3 rice harvests a year begins to falter. Fields that fed hundreds of thousands produce less. Labor that might repair the system is no longer available in sufficient numbers. Populations have thinned, corvée obligations have weakened, and the administrative apparatus that once coordinated thousands of workers across hundreds of kilometers has contracted alongside the empire's territorial reach. Then, in 1351, a new power crystallizes. Ramatibodi I founds Ayutthaya on an island at the confluence of 3 rivers in the central Chao Phraya plain, a site chosen for its strategic defensibility and its command of rich lowland agriculture. Ayutthaya absorbs Thai, Mon, and Khmer cultural elements, building a kingdom that is militarily aggressive and commercially ambitious. Within a year of its founding, Ayutthayan forces strike eastward. The traditional chronicles record a Siamese attack on Angkor in 1352, though modern scholars debate the precise dating and scale. What is certain is that the western approaches to the Angkor plain, the routes through the Dangrek passes, are now contested ground. Khmer armies that once marched westward to Lopburi now struggle to defend the corridors leading to their own capital. Abandoned provincial temples in what is now northeastern Thailand stand as silent markers of retreated authority, their sandstone lintels carved with Hindu deities presiding over courtyards where Thai monks now chant Pali Sutras. The Angkor plain itself shows signs of stress visible from above. Aerial surveys and later LiDAR imaging reveal canals that silted up and were never cleared, embankments that breached and were never repaired, residential zones at the empire's urban periphery that emptied as populations consolidated closer to the walled city. The West Barai, that colossal reservoir measuring 8 kilometers by 2.1 kilometers, still holds water, but its feeder channels are compromised. The intricate distribution network that once carried water to thousands of rice paddies functions at diminished capacity. By 1393, Ayutthaya strikes again. A large Siamese force crosses the Dangrek range and reaches the Angkor plain. The assault on the capital, whether a full siege or a devastating raid, inflicts damage that the empire can no longer absorb as it once absorbed the Cham invasion of 1177. There is no Jayavarman VII waiting in the wings, no military genius capable of rallying a shattered kingdom. The court endures, the temples still stand, monks still tend the shrines. But the defensive earthworks hastily thrown up around Angkor Thom speak of a capital that has become a fortress rather than the confident center of a continental empire. The tide is Thai, and it does not recede. The decades after 1393 unfold not as a single catastrophe, but as a slow unwinding. The Angkor plain, scarred by Siamese raids and parched by irregular monsoons, still supports a population, but it is a population diminished, scattered, and increasingly drawn toward the rivers. The Great Barays, once the empire's circulatory system, sit partially silted. The West Baray, that colossal reservoir stretching 8 kilometers across the plain, retains water in its deepest sections, but its intake channels from the Siem Reap River are clogged with sediment that no corvée labor force arrives to clear. The canals that once distributed water with geometric precision now meander into marshland. Rice yields fall. The surplus that fed temple workers, soldiers, and the elaborate court rituals contracts year by year. Inside Angkor Thom, the Bayon stone faces gaze outward over walls that have become the city's most essential feature. The royal palace compound, its wooden halls raised on laterite foundations, still functions, but the court's authority extends little beyond the immediate hinterland. Provincial governors in the Western Territories have either submitted to Ayutthaya or operate as independent lords. The Korat Plateau is lost. The old Khmer road network, with its 121 rest houses, leads now into territories governed by Thai princes. The early 15th century brings no reprieve. Dendrochronological evidence from the region records severe droughts interspersed with unusually intense monsoon flooding, a pattern of climatic instability that strikes at the very foundation of Angkor's hydraulic logic. The system was engineered for predictable seasonal rhythms. When those rhythms fracture, the infrastructure cannot adapt. Embankments breach during violent floods, then bake and crack during prolonged dry spells. The engineering genius of Yasovarman and Suryavarman II becomes a liability, a network too vast and too fragile for a weakened state to maintain. Meanwhile, the geography of trade is shifting. Maritime commerce along the South China Sea increasingly favors coastal ports accessible to Chinese junks and Southeast Asian traders. The Mekong Delta, the Gulf of Siam, and the river systems connecting the interior to the coast offer what Angkor cannot: direct access to the sea routes that now carry the region's wealth. The inland agricultural model that sustained the empire for 6 centuries is being overtaken by a riverine commercial model. The confluence of the Mekong, the Tonle Sap River, and the Basak at the site of Phnom Penh represents exactly this new logic, a crossroads of waterways linking the interior to the ocean. In 1431, Ayutthaya delivers the final blow. A Siamese army besieges Angkor, and after months of pressure, the capital falls. The details remain debated among scholars. Cambodian chronicles and Siamese records offer conflicting accounts, but the outcome is clear. The Khmer court, under King Ponhea Yat, abandons Angkor. The royal household, the Brahmin priests, the remaining officials and their retinues make the journey southward, following the Tonle Sap waterway toward the Quatre Bras, the four arms of the river junction at Phnom Penh. By approximately 1432, a new capital begins to take shape on the low hills above the confluence. Angkor does not empty overnight. Archaeological evidence and later accounts suggest that communities persist around the temples well into the 16th century. Angkor Wat itself is never fully abandoned. Theravada monks maintain the sanctuary, and pilgrims continue to visit. Japanese inscriptions from the 16th century appear on its walls, left by travelers who believed they had reached the Jetavana monastery of Buddhist legend. The temple transitions from the cosmic center of a Hindu-Buddhist empire to a living Theravada shrine, quieter, humbler, but unbroken in its sacred function. Yet the city as a political capital, as the heart of an empire, is finished. The jungle begins its patient work. Silk cotton trees send roots through gallery roofs. Strangler figs embrace sandstone door frames. The canals fill with vegetation. The outer temples, those beyond the moat of Angkor Thom, disappear beneath the canopy within generations. The great hydraulic grid, visible today only through aerial survey and laser imaging, becomes invisible at ground level, buried under forest and farmland. What remains above the green is stone, the temples, the causeways, the Naga balustrades, monuments too massive for the forest to consume entirely, standing as evidence of what once was. The court that departs Angkor does not vanish. It migrates, following the rivers southward toward the confluence where the Tonle Sap, the Mekong, and the Basak meet, a crossroads of water that offers what the old capital no longer can: direct access to maritime trade. Phnom Penh, a modest settlement on a low hill at this junction, becomes the first refuge. But the post-Angkorian kingdom is restless, its capital shifting with each generation's anxieties, each new threat from the west or east. By the late 15th century, the court settles at Lovek, a city built not of sandstone, but of timber and thatch, its royal palace rising on wooden pillars above the floodplain. No mountain temple anchors the skyline. Instead, gilded wooden spires crown monastery halls where Theravada monks chant in Pali. The kingdom's architecture has changed utterly, impermanent, organic, suited to a state that can no longer command the labor armies that once quarried Phnom Kulen. Lovek sits along the Tonle Sap River, positioned to intercept trade flowing between the interior and the sea. Portuguese and Spanish merchants arrive in the 16th century, finding a kingdom diminished but functioning, its markets offering lacquerware, deer hides, cardamom, and benzoin resin. A small community of Japanese traders establishes itself nearby. Catholic missionaries follow, recording a court that maintains elaborate royal ceremonies, elephant processions, and a hierarchical nobility, echoes of Angkorian grandeur translated into humbler materials. But Lovek's position between two expanding powers proves fatal. In 1594, Siamese armies under King Naresuan storm the city. The fall is devastating. Khmer chronicles record the loss of sacred texts, court regalia, and learned Brahmins carried away to Ayutthaya. The cultural hemorrhage is profound, a kingdom stripped not only of territory, but of institutional memory. The court retreats again, eventually settling at Odong, a ridge of low hills northwest of Phnom Penh, where royal stupas will accumulate over the next 2 centuries like layers of grief and perseverance. From Odong, Cambodian kings rule a shrinking domain. To the west, Siam treats Cambodia as a tributary buffer. To the east, Vietnamese expansion is relentless and methodical. The Mekong Delta, the fertile region Khmers call Pre Nokor, falls progressively under Vietnamese settlement and administration. By 1698, Pre Nokor has become Saigon, and the Delta's Khmer population finds itself a minority in its own ancestral land. Cambodia loses its coastline, its richest agricultural frontier, and its access to the South China Sea trade that once enriched Funan a millennium earlier. Yet within this contraction, a quieter transformation unfolds. Theravada Buddhism, now the unchallenged faith of the Khmer people, generates a literary renaissance written on palm leaf manuscripts in Khmer script. The Riamka, the Khmer adaptation of the Ramayana, takes its classical form during these centuries, performed in dance and recited in monastery courtyards. Jataka tales, moral verses, and chronicles are copied and recopied by monks who serve as the kingdom's educators, scribes, and moral authorities. The monastery replaces the stone temple as the center of community life, and the saffron-robed monk replaces the Brahmin priest as the kingdom's spiritual anchor. Through the 17th and 18th centuries, Cambodia endures a pattern of devastating regularity. Succession disputes invite intervention from both Siam and Vietnam, each installing rival princes as puppet kings. The kingdom becomes a chessboard for its neighbors, its sovereignty nominal, its borders fluid. Vietnamese garrisons occupy eastern provinces. Siamese governors administer western ones. The Cambodian court survives by playing one patron against the other, a diplomacy of desperation that preserves the throne while surrendering autonomy. By the mid-19th century, the kingdom has contracted to a narrow corridor along the Tonle Sap and Middle Mekong. King Ang Duong, enthroned in 1847 with joint Siamese and Vietnamese approval, recognizes that survival requires a new patron, one powerful enough to counterbalance both neighbors. In 1853, he dispatches a letter to the French Emperor Napoleon III, offering friendship and requesting protection. The appeal goes unanswered in his lifetime, but the door it opens will reshape Cambodia's future. Ang Duong dies in 1860, his kingdom intact but barely, its Angkorian past preserved only in temple ruins, palm leaf manuscripts, and the stubborn continuity of a people who refused to disappear. 3 years after Ang Duong's death, the door he opened swings wide. In 1863, his son Norodom signs a treaty with France, placing Cambodia under a protectorate that will endure for 90 years. French gunboats anchor in the Mekong. A resident superior takes up quarters in Phnom Penh. The kingdom that had been slowly consumed between Siamese and Vietnamese ambitions now passes into a third orbit, European, distant, and possessed of its own imperial logic. Siam relinquishes its claims over the Cambodian court in exchange for the provinces of Battambang and Siem Reap, which remain under Siamese control until 1907. The protectorate preserves Cambodia's borders at the cost of its sovereignty. Phnom Penh transforms. Colonial boulevards cut through the old riverside settlement. A new royal palace rises in 1866, its gilded spires blending Khmer tradition with French architectural planning. Administrative buildings, customs houses, and a telegraph office appear along the riverfront. The French impose direct taxation, abolish slavery in 1884, and strip the monarchy of executive power. A brief rebellion flares across the countryside in 1885 and 1886, led by provincial elites resisting the new order, but French military force suppresses it. The king remains, a symbol, a figurehead, a living link to the Angkorian past rendered ceremonial. Meanwhile, the temples that Ang Duong's generation knew only as jungle-wrapped ruins enter European consciousness. Henri Mouhod's sketches from 1860, published posthumously, had already stirred fascination, though Mouhod was neither the first European visitor nor a true discoverer. French scholars follow. In 1901, the École Française d'Extrême-Orient begins systematic study. When France recovers the provinces of Battambang and Siem Reap from Siam in 1907, Angkor falls under French jurisdiction. Conservation begins in earnest. Teams clear vegetation from gallery roofs, catalogue inscriptions, and develop the anastylosis technique, dismantling collapsed structures stone by stone and reassembling them on reinforced foundations. The Bayan's enigmatic faces emerge from centuries of strangler fig roots. Angkor Wat's moat is dredged. Bante Srey's exquisite carvings are cleaned and stabilized. The temples become France's proudest colonial showcase, a monument to the civilizing mission the Protectorate claims to embody, though the civilization being showcased is Khmer, not French. Colonial infrastructure spreads. Rubber plantations cover the red earth uplands. Roads link provincial towns. A Cambodian civil service, trained in French language schools, begins to form. Yet political expression remains tightly controlled. The first stirrings of nationalism emerge in the 1930s, influenced by movements in neighboring Vietnam and by the Nagara Vata newspaper, founded in 1936, which promotes Khmer cultural pride and modernization. Buddhist monks, educated in reformed Pali schools, become carriers of national consciousness. The monastery, not the political party, serves as the incubator of resistance. The Second World War shatters the colonial framework. Japan occupies Indochina from 1941, leaving French administration nominally in place but fatally weakened. In March 1945, Japan dismantles French authority entirely and encourages King Norodom Sihanouk to declare independence. The declaration proves premature. France returns after Japan's surrender and reasserts control. But the spell of colonial invincibility is broken. Sihanouk, placed on the throne in 1941 at age 18 by French officials who expected a pliant monarch, proves far shrewder than anticipated. Through the late 1940s and early 1950s, he maneuvers between French intransigence and the growing appeal of the Khmer Issarak independence movement. In 1952, he launches what he calls the Royal Crusade for Independence, a personal diplomatic campaign that takes him to France, the United States, Canada, and Japan, pleading Cambodia's case before the world press. He dissolves parliament, assumes direct rule, and threatens to join the resistance if France does not yield. France, bleeding from its war in Vietnam and facing mounting pressure across Indochina, relents. On November 9, 1953, Cambodia achieves full independence. Sihanouk stands before cheering crowds in Phnom Penh, the Cambodian flag raised where the tricolour once flew. On that flag, Rendered in red and blue, stands the silhouette of Angkor Wat, a temple built 8 centuries earlier by a Vaishnavite king, now claimed as the emblem of a modern nation reborn. The Protectorate era closes. What follows will test whether the inheritance of Angkor can survive the century's most violent storms. Independence brings not peace, but a brief, luminous interval. Through the late 1950s and 1960s, Sihanouk's Sangkum Rister Nium, the People's Socialist Community, transforms Cambodia into a neutralist kingdom balancing between Cold War powers. Phnom Penh flourishes with modernist architecture, its boulevards lined with frangipani. The Royal Ballet performs classical dances whose gestures trace directly to the apsaras carved on Angkor's galleries 800 years earlier. Yet neutrality proves impossible to sustain. The Vietnam War spills across Cambodia's eastern border. American bombing campaigns between 1969 and 1973 drop over 2 million tons of ordnance on Cambodian soil, devastating the countryside and driving displaced farmers toward a radical insurgency gathering strength in the forests. In 1970, a coup deposes Sihanouk. The Khmer Republic under Lon Nol collapses within 5 years, and on April 17, 1975, black-clad Khmer Rouge soldiers enter Phnom Penh. Within hours, the entire capital is emptied. 2 million residents march into the countryside at gunpoint. The regime of Democratic Kampuchea, led by Pol Pot, declares Year Zero, an agrarian revolution that claims to resurrect the glory of Angkor through forced labor, collective farming, and the elimination of intellectuals, monks, minorities, and anyone suspected of disloyalty. Monasteries are destroyed, saffron robes are burned. Of roughly 65,000 monks in Cambodia before 1975, fewer than 3,000 survive. The Khmer Rouge's grotesque irony is total, invoking the hydraulic civilization of Angkor to justify slave labor canal projects, while systematically annihilating the living bearers of Khmer culture. Between 1975 and 1979, an estimated 1.7 to 2.5 million Cambodians perish from execution, starvation, disease, and forced labor. Vietnamese forces invade in December 1978 and capture Phnom Penh on January 7, 1979. The Khmer Rouge retreats to the western jungles. A decade of Vietnamese occupation follows, then a fragile peace process brokered by the United Nations. The Paris Peace Accords of 1991 lead to UN-supervised elections in 1993, the largest peacekeeping operation in United Nations history to that point. Cambodia becomes a constitutional monarchy once more, its flag still bearing the silhouette of Angkor Wat. 1 year earlier, in 1992, Angkor is inscribed as a UNESCO World Heritage Site, simultaneously placed on the list of World Heritage in danger. International teams converge on the temples. Japanese conservators stabilize the Bayon. Indian archaeologists restore Ta Prohm. The Apsara National Authority, established in 1995, assumes stewardship of the park. By the 2000s, Angkor receives over 2 million visitors annually, peaking at 2.6 million before the global pandemic. Then the landscape itself reveals its deepest secret. LiDAR surveys conducted between 2012 and 2015 strip away the jungle canopy digitally, exposing an urban grid of staggering scale. Boulevards, residential mounds, canal networks, and earthworks stretching far beyond the known temple zone. Greater Angkor emerges as a dispersed metropolis exceeding 1,000 square kilometers, confirming it as the largest pre-industrial city ever documented. Beneath the forest floor, the empire's full skeleton becomes visible for the first time in 6 centuries. Today, the classical Khmer language lives in every Cambodian school. Theravada Buddhism, the faith that quietly replaced the god-king's Hindu Mahayana grandeur, remains the spiritual foundation of the nation. The royal ballet still performs the gestures of carved apsaras, each flexed finger a thread connecting 14 million living Cambodians to the sandstone galleries of the 12th century. Angkor Wat catches the equinox sunrise exactly as Jayavarman II intended, its towers glowing amber above the moat. The empire fell. The civilization endures, written in stone, carried in water, spoken in a language older than the temples themselves. Thank you for joining this journey through the full arc of Khmer civilization. If these stories of stone and water moved you, consider subscribing so you never miss a new exploration into the great histories that shaped our world.